No one listened to Zara until it was too late. Zara stepped off the school bus, her backpack heavy and her heart pounding. Westwood Academy looked huge and perfect, with shiny floors, tall windows, and students laughing in groups. But Zara felt a chill. Whispers followed her as she walked through the hall, and some students turned to stare. She was black, proud of her skin, but here it made her stand out. She had worked hard to earn a scholarship to this expensive school. Her parents had given everything they had to help her succeed, and she could not tell them how cruel some students were. She couldn't let them worry. Her first class was English. She raised her hand to answer a question, but Mr. Baker, a tall white teacher, ignored her completely. A white girl repeated her answer and received praise. Zara swallowed her pride and sat down, her chest tight with embarrassment. She wanted to shout to make them see her, but she stayed silent. Lunch was worse. Zara tried to sit alone in the corner, hoping no one would notice her. But a group of popular students pointed and laughed. "Look at her sandwich," one whispered loudly. "Scholarship kid thinks she belongs here," another said. Zara's stomach twisted. She ate quickly, wishing she could disappear. In math class, her homework disappeared. She had turned it in on time, but no one noticed. Other students' papers were praised, while hers vanished. The whispers and laughter followed her everywhere. She felt invisible. At home, she sat on a small couch, clutching her journal. She could not tell her parents. They had sacrificed so much for her to attend this school. They could not see her broken. Every page of her journal was filled with sadness, anger, and desperation. "I don't know how to keep going," she wrote. "No one sees me. No one cares." Each night, she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. She wanted to make her parents proud, but the bullying, the laughter, the teachers ignoring her, it all made her feel smaller and smaller. She was trapped, invisible, and alone. One night, after another day of humiliation, Zara sat on her bed, tears streaming down her face. She held her journal tightly and whispered to herself, "I can't do this anymore. No one will ever see me." The darkness in her mind grew, wrapping around her heart like a heavy stone. She felt utterly alone. And in the quiet of her small dorm room, Zara made a choice that would change everything. The next morning, Westwood Academy felt different. Students laughed, teachers moved through the halls, and the sun shone through the windows as if nothing had changed. But for Zara, the weight of yesterday lingered. She walked into the school quietly, keeping her head down, trying to disappear in plain sight. In her first class, science, she tried to raise her hand again. Her mind raced with ideas and answers, but Mr. Lewis, tall white teacher with a stern face, didn't even glance her way. Another student answered her question and was praised. The applause echoed in her ears like a cruel reminder. Zara clenched her fists under the desk, holding back tears. She wanted to shout to make them see her, but she only sat silently. Lunch was just as painful. She sat alone at the corner table, opening her small sandwich, hoping no one would notice. A group of popular students approached her table. "Scholarship kid lunch again," one sneered. Another whispered, "Do you really think you belong here?" Zara's hand shook, and her heart raced. She stayed silent, biting her lip, pretending not to hear. After school, she returned to her tiny apartment, exhausted. She opened her journal and began to write furiously. "I can't tell my parents," she scribbled. "They worked so hard to get me here. They can't see me like this. I can't let them worry." Her words poured out like a river of pain. Every page became a reflection of her invisible suffering. She wrote about the teachers who ignored her, the students who laughed at her, and the cruel jokes that followed her like shadows. Each night, she stared at the ceiling, wondering if anyone would ever care. The loneliness wrapped around her like a heavy blanket, suffocating her. One evening, she stared at the ceiling longer than usual. The room was quiet, but her mind was loud with despair. "Why does no one see me?" she whispered. "Why does it hurt so much just to exist?" Tears rolled down her cheeks. She felt trapped in a world that refused to notice her brilliance, her heart, and her soul. For the first time, Zara thought about giving up completely. The feeling was heavy, dark, and suffocating. She hugged her journal tightly, whispering to herself, "I don't want to hurt anyone, but I can't keep living like this." Her hands trembled, and the world outside her window seemed far away and unreachable. The next day at school, the whispers were louder, the stares sharper. But Zara didn't care anymore. Something inside her had changed. She felt like the world was closing in, and she was fading, invisible to everyone who should have seen her. And deep inside, a storm was growing, one that no one could stop. The morning sun streamed through the windows of Westwood Academy, but for Zara, it felt cold and harsh. She walked down the polished halls, her backpack heavy and her heart heavier. Students laughed and whispered, some giving her mocking glances as she passed. She kept her eyes on the floor, trying to disappear, but the whispers always found her. In history class, she tried to participate, raising her hand to answer a question. Mr. Thompson, a white teacher with a sharp tone, looked at her once and then called on someone else. Her answer was ignored. The other student repeated it and received praise. Zara's stomach twisted. She felt invisible, like her voice didn't matter, like she didn't exist. At lunch, she carried her tray to an empty corner, hoping no one would notice. But a group of students saw her. "There's the scholarship kid," one said, laughing. "Sitting alone, of course." Another added, "She probably doesn't even know how to fit in here." Zara's hands trembled as she unpacked her lunch. She tried to eat quickly, hiding her tears, wishing she could vanish. After school, she returned to her small apartment. The apartment smelled faintly of her mother's cooking, but it offered no comfort. She opened her journal, her only friend, and began writing again. "I can't tell my parents," she wrote. "They sacrificed everything to get me here. They can't see me like this. I can't let them worry." She wrote about the constant bullying, the teachers who ignored her, and the classmates who whispered behind her back. Each night she stared at the ceiling, wondering if anyone would ever see her, if anyone would care. The loneliness pressed on her like a heavy stone. One evening, she looked at herself in the mirror, her reflection pale and tired. "Why does no one see me?" she whispered. Tears rolled down her cheeks. "I try, I work hard, I stay strong, but they don't care. They only see the color of my skin." Her hand shook, and she hugged her journal tightly. The next day at school, the whispers were sharper, the sneers colder. Students pushed her aside in the halls, teachers ignored her questions, and even her classmates in group work left her out. Zara felt smaller and smaller, like she was fading into the walls of Westwood Academy. By the end of the day, Zara sat alone on the bus, staring out the window. She thought of her parents and how much they had given for her education. She didn't want to disappoint them, but the pain of invisibility and humiliation was unbearable. The storm inside her was growing heavier and darker, and she didn't know how much longer she could hold on. The next morning, Zara woke up feeling a heavy weight in her chest. Even the bright sunlight through her window couldn't lift it. She got dressed quietly, trying not to wake anyone, and left her apartment for school. The streets were busy, but she felt completely alone in the crowd. Each step toward Westwood Academy felt heavier than the last, as if the building itself knew how unwelcome she felt. In her first class, chemistry, she tried to participate again. She raised her hand with a question about the experiment, but Mr. Simmons, a tall white teacher with sharp eyes, ignored her completely. Another student, a white boy named Kyle, answered her question instead and received applause. Zara's chest tightened. She wanted to shout to make them see her, but she sat silently, her hands trembling on the desk. Lunch was worse than ever. She carried her tray to the corner, sitting as far from the main tables as possible. But a group of students noticed her. "There's the scholarship kid again," one said, snickering. "Wonder if she even knows what she's doing here." Another whispered, "She doesn't fit in and she never will." Zara's heart raced. She picked at her sandwich, trying to make herself invisible. After school, she returned home to her small apartment. The familiar smell of her mother's cooking didn't comfort her. She sat on the couch and opened her journal, pouring out her thoughts. "I can't tell my parents," she wrote. "They sacrificed everything for me. They can't see me like this. I can't let them worry." Her handwriting trembled across the page, filled with sadness, anger, and fear. She wrote about the teachers who ignored her, the students who bullied her, and the cruel jokes that followed her everywhere. She wrote about feeling invisible and small, like her voice didn't matter, like she was fading from the world. Each night she stared at the ceiling, wishing someone would notice, someone would care, someone would see the real Zara. One evening, after a particularly cruel day, Zara stared at her reflection in the mirror. Her eyes were red from crying, her lips trembling. "Why does no one see me?" Tears ran down her face. "I try. I work hard. I stay strong, but they only see my skin, not me. Her hands shook as she hugged her journal tightly, feeling the darkness inside her grow heavier. By the time she got to bed, the loneliness and pain were almost too much to bear. She curled up under the blanket, thinking of her parents and their sacrifices and how much she wanted to make them proud. But the torment of being unseen and rejected was relentless. She felt trapped, small, invisible, and completely alone. The next morning at school, the whispers were louder, the stares colder. Even her classmates who had once nodded at her ignored her completely. Teachers still didn't call on her. She walked through the hallways like a ghost, her spirit shrinking with every passing moment. The storm inside her heart grew stronger, heavier, and darker. The next morning at school, the whispers were louder, the stares colder. Even her classmates who had once nodded at her ignored her completely. Teachers still didn't call on her. She walked through the hallways like a ghost, her spirit shrinking with every passing moment. The storm inside her heart grew stronger, heavier, and darker. That evening, Zara returned to her small apartment. She sat on her bed, clutching her journal, tears running down her cheeks. She thought about her parents, about how much they had sacrificed for her, and how much she wanted to make them proud. But the pain, the constant rejection, the loneliness, it all felt unbearable. She opened her journal one last time, writing her deepest thoughts, her fears, and her pain. I tried. I worked hard. I stayed strong, but they don't see me. No one sees me. I can't keep going like this, she wrote. Her hands trembled as she set the pen down. In the quiet of her room, she made the heartbreaking decision. She took a handful of pills, curling up under her blanket. The world around her faded slowly, leaving only silence. Zara's bright mind, her hopes, and her dreams were swallowed by the darkness that had followed her every day. The next morning, the school was thrown into chaos. Students screamed, teachers ran through the hallways, and parents arrived in shock. Zara had been found gone. The grief was unbearable. Investigations revealed the years of bullying, exclusion, and neglect she had suffered. The school had failed her. The principal called an emergency assembly. Teachers, staff, parents, and students gathered, unable to stop crying. We failed her, he said softly. She trusted us, and we let her down. The whispers and laughter that had once tormented her became a haunting echo for everyone. By the end of the week, Westwood Academy was shut down. The hallways were silent, classrooms empty, and every corner seemed to hold the memory of Zara. Parents and students left flowers, notes, and messages in her memory. Her journal was shared publicly, revealing her thoughts, her brilliance, and her pain. Zara's life ended too soon, but her story sparked change. Schools implemented stronger anti-bullying policies. Students and teachers began campaigns for kindness, inclusion, and awareness. Her name became a symbol of courage, resilience, and the urgent need to care for every child. Though Zara was gone, her story lived on, a reminder that invisibility can destroy even the brightest spirit, and that every child deserves to be seen, heard, and loved. If you found this story captivating, don't forget to subscribe and share.